He's got to send it out to Mast, and he's got to do something quick. The crowd counting it off. Mast puts it up. It's going to be Max Shepard back there against everybody, and he comes down with it! And he comes down with it! John Mast knew who he had back there, and with nothing left on the clock, Max Shepard gets to line up his jump. It was perfectly placed, and the Thunderbirds win the game 18-17. How do you like that?
2023 is here, and Swing Pass is back. We've got week 1 recap action, a huge opening weekend in the AUDL. I am Adam Ruffner, that is Daniel Cohen. We are just going to jump right into it. DC Breeze took care of business on road, getting the big win against the Carolina Flyers, 21-15 in the AUDL game of the week. Carolina came back at home to notch it at 15s in the second half, but a 6-1 run by the Breeze close it out. They improved to 1-0, look like a super team this year. Thomas Edmonds, Andrew Roy, and Joe Merrill all make big debut impacts, but Christian Boxley coming away as the man of the game on Saturday night. And elsewhere in the league, there was just so much action, a slew of big home favorites taking care of their businesses at home in Salt Lake, New York, and Atlanta. And then two of the wilder finishes to start the season. Thunderbirds coming away with a walk-off winner in Pittsburgh on a Max Shepard sky at the buzzer. That one was electric, and I do mean that with a pun intended for the Thunderbirds. And then in Oakland yesterday, there was an equal barn burner when the Seattle Cascades in the second game of a back-to-back push it to the first overtime match of the season, but the Spiders prevail in front of a raucous home crowd. Debuting in his first game with the Spiders, Mac Hecht threw for over 570 yards, 9 assists. Biggest one coming on the last possession of the Spiders game, or I should say second to last. They had one final possession just running out the clock, but Mac Hecht right outside the end zone just lofts a game-winning scoober to the front cone, easy as can be. Then the following possession, Seattle gets all the way within the red zone, and team veteran Brandon Fine just closes the door on the Cascades game. That was one of the more emphatic point blocks. You could just see Seattle completely deflate after they had given such a good effort throughout that game. Man, oh man, that was a pretty dang good week 1.
I'm happy with that. I mean, I will say the game of the week, I mean, we should probably start there. It was weird. I'll just start with that. It was not exactly what I expected. I think DC obviously had a lot of hype coming into that game, coming off an incredible offseason with all these new additions. And I guess I wouldn't have said there was like higher than a 50% chance that everything would like work so seamlessly from the get-go. But I do think I was expecting maybe a little bit more chemistry, a little bit more polish just from the pure talent of these guys. But I don't know, they kind of showed that they're human in a lot of ways. And just like any team integrating new pieces, there will be some bumps and a learning curve along the way. Rowan McDonald debuting on the Breeze D-line, re-debuting, I should say, for the first time since 2017 or whenever he was a D-line staple. It was weird to me that, so he had that great run through D in the first quarter, and that was like, okay, I love D-line Rowan right away. He's like, I like him a lot as a defensive playmaker. I think he just has like a natural hustle about his game and then really like brings that intensity. But then DC like kept calling timeouts every time there'd be a turnover. So it's like, if you're going to move him to D-line, why are you not even giving him a chance? Like, there was never a point where it was like, okay, this is Rowan leading the D-line counterattack and like, this is his possession, this is why he's there. No, it was like they always wanted their O-line on the field. Did you feel like that was weird?
I hear what you're saying, and I do think that I jive with it a little bit. I will say two things. One, I think you're underrating maybe Rowan's just skill as a coverage defender. I absolutely hear you. You want him out there quarterbacking off of a turn. That's kind of maybe why you're leveraging him on that line in the first place. But two, I mean, look at the rest of the schematic for that DC Breeze counterattack, right? I mean, AJ Merriman, David Bloodgood, even David Cranston. These are guys who are aggressive with the disc. And I just think that they like to engage in that fast break right off of turnovers so quickly that Daryl has sort of aged into a wisdom, per se, of when there's a possession that they need to score in the goal, they're going to sub on the offense. And I think that for as good as Rowan is, the DC Breeze offense acquitted itself again and again as being very capable in those positions. I mean, you look at the new additions with Edmonds and with Aroy, they of course just fit in so fluidly to that weave-heavy DC Breeze attack. And then, of course, I thought the two best players for their offense all night. Johnny Malks had kind of an up-and-down night. He had a good defensive play at the end of the game. He had a couple of nice hucks, but also a few turnovers that I think both you and I raised our eyebrows a little bit at. But you know, that's kind of been his style. You know, he takes risks. Definitely. He's the risk taker on that offense that is otherwise just efficiency stat heads everywhere else in their lineup. I mean, Jeremy Knopf was in there last night playing his super effective brand of Ultimate. He had one turnover in the 2022 season. He was just churning in the lane. But I wanted to get back to Edmonds, of course, had a terrific debut downfield, but the tandem of Tyler Monroe and Christian Boxley was just phenomenal. They can do everything for this Breeze offense. And they do this thing. I was trying to think about how to conceptualize how they work, because they're not, strictly speaking, highlight players, especially Monroe. No. He just works in the margins, and he's such a grinder, and he's so hard to stay in front of. And it's just tough to deal with his size and pace. Boxley can make highlights. Obviously, he had a couple on Saturday night. He had a great jump swat. He had a couple great defensive plays, actually. He had a couple great hustle plays up line. But he is just so good with his timing and so fast and has such a high field IQ that he makes so much of the game look easy. Anyways, I was trying to conceptualize how they play together, and it's like they're lock picks who go around the field and just figure out every little defensive formation and how they can beat it. And at the beginning of the game, it might feel like a little slow, like they're figuring things out. And then there's a point where it just kind of clicks and they're just starting to rack up scores. And you could see that with Monroe and Boxley. It was like once they sort of sussed out what the Flyers coverage was trying to do, you could just see them starting to attack a little bit more. Brian Jones last night in the commentary was talking about how DC kind of has this spring-loaded effect. They'll sort of lull you into these longer drives, and then all of a sudden it's a quick release into the end zone for Edmonds. It's an upline cut for Boxley. It's a scandal cut from the handler sets. Like I feel like that so much is facilitated by Monroe and Boxley just being open. Just going around, I think figuring out what spots they can get to, getting into rhythm, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh dang, they're up over 20 touches a piece, and we haven't figured out how to slow that down yet. And now it's the crunch time of the game, and they're just leaning on those guys. And as you saw the Breeze did, they just closed out on the Flyers. And I've taken up too much wind, and so I want to maybe give it to you to talk about how the Flyers looked good for all their new pieces and all this versatility and all this lineup adjustment. But particularly in that final stretch in the fourth quarter, it didn't feel like they had developed enough of a game plan and consistency to deal with the Breeze. Yeah, the Flyers approach, I don't want to call the Flyers were weird as well as DC. I don't want to call their approach weird necessarily. Maybe bad. a little less. They tied the game at 15s and they made all. I know. It was a little. The Jacob Fairfax halftime buzzer beater off of the William Coffin Mac was one of the crazier plays. I think Carolina, I guess I'm curious. The fact that they didn't have Eric Taylor, they didn't have Matt Gucci-Johannes, like, I don't know if this was... Gucci-Johannes, like, in neon lights was, like, the absence for the game. Yeah. Oh, for sure. And you saw it from the very beginning. And, yeah, they're trotting out guys that are, like, traditional D-line players on offense. And, obviously, like, they needed someone to fill that role. But I don't know if this, like, team-wide approach to just, like, having pretty fluid O&D lines, if that's something they're going to run with all season, or if it was something they particularly thought of for this opening game, given their personnel. And like you said, I like seeing the versatility of guys like Mataraju and Ethan Bloodworth and Connor Russell. Like, everyone kind of had their moments.
on the O-line, but yeah, there was just no consistent stability for the most part. There was like, yeah, kind of a team-wide energy that got them to tie the game up at 15s. But yeah, you never felt like they could throw out 7 guys on that line and you're like, okay, these guys are hot. Like these 7 are clicking and we trust them to punch in a score. Like, I don't think I felt that ever in that game with Carolina, which is weird considering how they've been the past several seasons. So I'm really curious to see like where this approach takes them going forward. And yeah, like you said, getting Gu Johannes back, hopefully they can get him back soon, because that was a very clear missing piece to that offense, because it sets up everything else. Like him and Yannick, like they're absolutely the backbone of the offense, and it shows.
When you're getting that free reset, when you can mobilize your attack to any position on the field, as Carolina has done now for several seasons with Gu Johannes and Yannick anchoring that backfield, you were right. You see with his absence, the Flyers just look different from how they normally look. And it's not to say that they don't have the talent to cover up some of their losses. I mean, they were in this game in the fourth quarter, to their credit, right? But yeah, I think you're right. There was something missing. It was like the difference between going out for tapas, which is like the Flyers. You know, you get a little sample here. You get this connection. Ooh, Ethan Bloodworth throwing a midfield hammer that's continuation in the offensive set. You've got Andrews Jung airing it out to Mataraju downfield. That's a new look. But it's not a full meal, and it's like the Breeze attack just felt like an entree. It felt like they were setting up this system from the first quarter, and then when they needed to just execute to close out, they could. All of those closing goals in the back half of the fourth quarter, for better or worse, looked easy for the Breeze. They were not sweating those possessions, and I think that had to do with just rolling in with their attack.
And it makes me feel like, well, DC, like their conversion rate for the game wasn't great. They converted 57% of their offensive possessions. But like you could see that there's like clear building blocks in place for them to up that efficiency throughout the season, just as these guys get more and more comfortable with each other. Whereas with Carolina, like I don't see a path to suddenly becoming a super efficient offense unless they kind of get back to where they were last year and the year before.
So here's my weird question for the game. Do you think that there is the possibility that the Flyers skunked their rotations a little bit in this matchup? That they were maybe kind of play testing a certain bit? That they were... It reminds me so much of the 2021 first game of the season when they went and played Atlanta, and they played a bunch of players out of their normal positions in that game. And it was the first game of the series. It was super close against their basically border rivals in the hustle. And they ended up losing almost at the buzzer of regulation. And it just... Or was that game in overtime? It might have gone to overtime.
No, it was overtime, yeah.
But that version of the Flyers was not the same one that the Hustle would face later in the season. And I'm blanking right now. I don't think the Flyers and DC face off again, but I'm just wondering if that was even just to kind of get everyone playing time, get everyone into every role, and just sort of say like, hey, this is a really good component or opponent. We ran with them for 4 quarters and we're not even set yet. Like, this is something that we build off of. They need to prepare for our final form now. Like, do you think there's a possibility for that? I don't know if there's that much meta level gamesmanship. I mean, individual wins are so important. We talk all the time about how interdivisional games are like 1.x or 1.5x, importance on the schedule. But
I think you could view it that way, but I don't think it was necessarily intentional. They do play DC again this year. That's why like it is like extra notable for them to do it in a DC game, because like, yeah, their schedule, I mean, it's 2 DC games, 4 Atlanta games, 2 Austin games. Every game is going to matter, and we know how tight this South Division playoff race is going to be, just because Austin's just going to be beating up on Texas teams presumably most of the season. So I don't know. I mean, I do think doing this in week 1 is kind of a nice way to see like, okay, what do we have in Joe White? What do we have in Ben Snell? Like, what happens when we put Elijah Long on offense, and like how can he do kind of commandeering that backfield But I don't think this is like what they did in this game cannot be a long-term solution for the season. But hopefully it did reveal some things in the pieces that they had. So I think that would be like the optimistic way to look at it.
I'm just putting it out there. I think that it would be very hard to scout the Flyers off of this film. As we said, it didn't look like any version of them that we've seen before. It did not look like
weird
a Carolina team, and so just maybe a little.
I will say, one other new addition. Matt Tucker playing defense was phenomenal.
Yeah,
he was like their most consistent player all night.
He did exactly what he did for the Radicals in like the first quarter of the game when Carolina fell behind 3-0 in the first few points. It was a Tucker block right near the goal line that got the Flyers their first break of the season. It was just I was screaming Matt Tucker in my apartment, probably to my neighbor's concern. No idea. We should move on. We've got so many other games to talk about. I know we could talk about Game of the Week so much more. We'll definitely delve more into this matchup as we get into the week. But there were 3 big home wins for favored home teams from this past weekend. As I mentioned before, Salt Lake taking care of business on Friday night, 28-20 in their home opener against the Cascades. It was the debut of Grant Lindsley with the shred. He looks like he is going to fit in just fine with that team. He went 14 of 15, over 300 total yards, 6 total scores, and just he had one quasi practice months ago with the team, I think, as kind
last year. It was last year he practiced with the team once. He has not practiced with them like this preseason with this iteration of the roster.
Stepped onto the field, had his headband rocking, and just was processing ultimate faster than anyone else on the field, which is what Grant Lindsley does. He simply operates at a speed that exceeds everyone else around him, and the result is that he makes everything look easy. Everything is in rhythm. You see him with the disc. It's these little, hezzy upline continuations. I want to stop and talk about that one for a second. That
the throw to Kerr.
That juke, and then the just floaty, pillowy pass to Kerr sprinting up line. That's one of those plays that is just a win condition, and not many teams have people who can do that. And now the Shred kind of have 2 in Grant Lindsley and Jordan Kerr. And you could see it on Friday night. Their ceiling gets bumped up to here, right? When he's on the field. And with that quick twitch assist, he does things in such a way and so quickly that the people around him, unless you are on the same page with him, are simply playing a different game. Like when his defender got hit with that shimmy, Grant releases the throw, and it's an assist. That defender is still locked in on Grant like he's defending him. Points over, bro. Like
it's the subtlest shimmy.
Like Grant,
it happens too fast.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So we spent enough on. Oh no! Go ahead.
No. Well, let's preference
I wanted
the other games
there was
too.
A couple other great important performances in that Friday night game, particularly from the Shred backfield of Sean Cannell, Jacob Miller, and Luke Jorgensen. I just thought all 3 of them had a visible degree of improvement over the offseason. They look more aggressive as a unit. They look more precise. They had an insistence against the Seattle defense from the start. Cannell was just uncorking bombs all night.
He's got a cannon.
That thin air, and when he gets that backhand wound up, that
backhand is nuts.
Lights out.
It's a whip. He just it's so aesthetically pleasing to watch too. Like I love when it happens.
As good as he was, and like as highlight prone as his plays were, I was equally impressed with Miller and Luke Jorgensen. Their ability to reset and their activity with their legs. I mean, Salt Lake had free movement all game long, and I know the Cascades defense isn't super elite. And I know this is exactly how the Shred presented at the beginning of the season last year when they just simply had better conditioning and ran out teams in that first month of play in 2022. They're looking the same way this year. But man, Luke Jorgensen, he's just got a nice game. He breaks the mark with ease. He kind of is a West Coast Andrew Roy a little bit, in that it's just impossible to knock him off of his rhythm and not sort of let him distribute in the ways that he wants to. And when he's doing that, you just see how everything else falls into place for the Shred team.
I think he also looked a little bit more aggressive this year. Like I think he was taking a few more shots towards the end zone, and like he had a huck in I think the first half, maybe the first quarter. That whole O line, like one of my bigger takeaways from week one is like you said, like this ceiling has definitely been elevated, and it's guys like that. It's the Jorgensen, Knoll, Jacob Miller, but also like Jace Dunabile had a great game out of nowhere. Like Elijah Jaime also slotted in seamlessly to the offense. Like they just have
slowly realizing I left off Jaime, all business, no smiles, scoring 5 goals, 240 yards, and it just feels like he's going to stamp
very casually
those stats onto every single game this season. Just feels like clock 5 goals plus 200 yards for Jaime every single game.
I just feel like they're clearly leveled up from the Jordan Kerr centric offense we saw last year. And Will Selfridge, like he wasn't even he split his time a little bit on O-line and D-line, obviously like a spark plug wherever you put him. He was like this close to Callahan at one point. He had that huge breakaway goal as well. Like they're just looking a lot deeper as far as like their offensive talent goes. And then their D-line was like mostly fine. Like it was kind of the same thing that we saw last year, even with like the amount of turnover that they had in their starting rotation. So I think Salt Lake they're looking great so far. Obviously, again, we got to pump the brakes a little bit because it was a Seattle game, but still good to see for Shred heads, excuse me.
60 goals now in their last 2 games at home against Seattle for the Shred. Just
pretty good.
Lighting it up in that Zion Stadium. Moving on, the defending champions played in a gale force wind, rainstorm, tempest.
It was just a mess.
Not fun.
Really
for the
yucky.
And especially as you're trying to do a trophy presentation at halftime.
Right.
Empire at least rewarded the faithful with a dominating win at home. They jumped out to an 8-1 lead over Philadelphia at the end of the first quarter, really epitomized by the final play, which was Philly receiving the pull, I think, with under 10 seconds left in the quarter, just looking for the first simple pass, and they turf it. They have a 3-on-2 advantage off of the turn on the short field. Ben Katz picks up the disc and just lofts it to Jack Williams in triple coverage. And of course, Jack comes down with it. Like, of course.
Yeah,
so they got 7 goals at the end of the first frame, and it's just sort of done from that point. You can just see that the Empire defense is still at its championship level. They can run 2 lines of full starters and take your legs away from you by halftime against basically any opponent. And that's kind of what they did against Philly. They just snuffed them out at the point of attack. The weather didn't allow the Phoenix to get into the deep game that they like to employ on offense so much, and they simply didn't have an alternative route. The handler defenders for the Empire and John Randolph, Marcus Brownlee, the new addition of Breton Tan, were just fantastic all night. I mean, I want to give you the stat pull kind of this episode and what Tan did to one of the best players on Philly.
So, yeah, Sean Mott drew the Breton Tan matchup for most of that game. Mott finished with only 9 completions on the day. He was 9 of 10. He also scored a goal, so I guess that's 11 total touches. His fewest touches since 2017. He had a weird game against DC where he only had 4 completions, all of them went for assists. But yeah, fewest completions in a game in, was that 6 years?
6 years.
For Sean Mott. And, like, obviously part of it is the weather, but, like, you want your best player touching the disc as much as possible, generally, in these conditions. So the fact that Tan was able to shut him down like he did and really just gave the Philly offense no outlets for consistent disc movement, like, that was obviously huge.
I mean, and it goes beyond the personnel, right? This Empire team is loaded with playmakers. It's now gotten to the point where I'm just watching how they exchange stuff, and their communication is just silly good at this point. I mean, Ben Yap
very polished,
free safety the entire time on the back end, and I think there's this notion that it's easier to just exchange and always just have the big guy taking whoever goes deep. It's not that easy when the field is 40 yards wide to just take whoever is going for the deep cut, and yet Yacht just kind of put a canopy over anything Philly was trying to do. Even when they were trying bailout hucks, trying to play field position at certain points in the game, there was just nothing doing for them. They completed a couple hugs.
Yeah.
And they got a look here or there, but by and large, it was just clamp city for the Empire. I mean, it's game to be scary. I think teams need to start being scared of this defense. They've got too many shutdown players. We talk all the time about their offense. I'm really starting to wonder if the real power of this New York team is from their D lines, right?
I mean, I was going to say their D line out-converted their O-line 50% to 40%.
They did that a couple times last year. There was a few games last year where they did that.
I mean, John Randolph had, 4 assists? Like, he looks great, but it's like the variety of directions they can go with the disc after turnovers, and the fact that they're converting that quickly and efficiently, I don't know how anyone deals with it. I mean, Philly is definitely going to be in trouble if they, don't have a plan B when, the weather is bad and they can't really hit their deep game and get that going. But at the same time, I view this as, New York looks as scary as ever heading into this season.
Speaking of as scary as ever, the other big win from this past weekend was the Atlanta Hustle outmatching Indianapolis 23-14. These two teams met in the final game of the regular season. Indy played well in that game. They stuck close. I think the Hustle still had a wire-to-wire win in 2022, but Indy acquitted themselves in this matchup. This was lights out from the Hustle from get-go. They just looked better. There was just an affect to the way that they started playing this game where it was, oh, it's good Atlanta tonight. They're definitely one of those teams I feel like within the first 5 points, you can tell exactly what kind of game they're going to have.
For sure.
Are the deep balls connecting? Is everyone just running? Is it 4 verticals downfield?
Right.
Oh, okay. We're in for it tonight. I mean,
that's still why it's so weird that they lost to New York in the 2021 playoff game, because that was one of their good Atlanta games, but then it was just a slow New York comeback. But no, I totally get what you're saying.
And
they were out.
They were going deep to Eck-Wurzel in that playoff game. Anyways, they landed the same thing to Indy. They can also just big boy teams at this point. They have so many big players, and they challenge you to make plays one-on-one versus them in space, and it's challenging. It's challenging to match up with the Hustle 1-versus-1 across the board. They're going to be one of the best teams throughout this entire season. The big question about Atlanta is, can they sort of win the big games? Can they get playoff wins? Can they get a home playoff game and not always kind of have to play just a little bit behind some of their closer rivals? Because when they have games like this, it's I still expect Indy to be pretty good. Indy doesn't lose by 9 goals very often. They
right.
They had a 3-win season in 2021. They made the playoffs last year, but when they suffer losses, they're usually pretty close. This is over.
I mean, this was Atlanta. Atlanta had 7 turnovers on the day, and I'm pretty sure. I think
last year, weren't they? Sorry.
I think they were definitely up there. I'm pretty sure they have the single game record, in AUDL history, of fewest turnovers a game. They had fewest turnovers in a specific game. I think they had a 6 turnover game against Pittsburgh 2 years ago, maybe. But 7 turnovers, that number always rings a bell, because that was what Carolina did in the 2021 championship game, and a couple of those turnovers were just throwaway onto quarter ones. If a team is turning it over anywhere less than 10 times per game, they're gonna win. So there really wasn't much Indy could do in this one. I am curious though, in your mind, does this change your opinion? This result in particular, does it at all change your opinion on either Atlanta or Indy coming into the season, or not really? It's hard to put weight on it.
It's weird. I think if you would have asked me that before, if you told me this result 4 days ago, I think I would have said yes. I think it would have elevated Indy, and it also would have elevated Atlanta and also dropped Indy.
Yeah.
I just kind of feel like this is a week 1 interdivisional.
Right.
Atlanta's just so athletic and motivated after missing the playoffs last year. I don't quite chalk it up to Indy, but I need to go and watch it a little bit closer. I need to kind of dive into that game still.
Yeah.
First takeaway is just Atlanta looks dominant at times, which is what I would like to see for them. I like
Right.
teams who I consider to be kind of in the top 8 take care of opponents who they should take care of.
Right, and I think it's a good sign for Atlanta that right off the bat they had one of their good Atlanta games, right? It kind of like sets the tone for the whole season going forward, and you can see the ceiling apparent like immediately, which is good.
Well, those were the blowouts. Let's talk about the crazy finishes. Let's start in the Central with Pittsburgh's walk-off winner at Highmark Stadium. Just a huge celebration at the end of that one. Pittsburgh went out to a huge lead to start that game. They almost doubled up Madison at the end of the first half. I think it was like 8-4 or something, 9-4 at that point. They got out to a crazy start. And then Madison did what they historically do against their interdivisional opponents. They just ratchet back into evens and slowly retake the lead. And that's what happened in the second half. Radicals got a little bit of a trading advantage, started to hold that 1-goal lead where Pittsburgh kept having to kind of catch up to them. And then sort of in a complete reversal in all of the cosmic energy that has been happening in this division for years and has slowly been shifting away from the Radicals these past several seasons. The breaks that traditionally go in Madison's favor did not at the end of this game. And that culminated in Pittsburgh finding their star, Max Shepard, in the end zone with the game winner, winning 18-17. I think that this confirms what I've been thinking about, and maybe too quietly the past few weeks, which is that I think the T-Birds can hang in the playoff race. I think that their starting rotations have enough playmakers for them to stay in a lot of games, especially in a scoring capacity. And I think that their defense is more committed than it has been the past 2 seasons. I think that Alex Thomas's return is way, way bigger than any kind of statistical output that he's necessarily going to put out there. I think just having him as kind of a locker room presence is going to boost that whole unit a lot. Mm-hmm. One thing that we don't talk about is that they were missing their team captain, Sam Van Duzen, for a lot of last year. You know, there are pieces to like on this Thunderbirds team. And so I think that just reminded me of that. And more importantly, I think it reminds me that they can win close games. I think that is something that the Thunderbirds have not been good at the past 2 seasons. You know, you think back to this matchup last year, Madison won at the buzzer, basically coming from behind and snatching victory from the claws of defeat. And now it's the Thunderbirds repaying them almost 1 year later exactly. Again, it's both an elevation of the Thunderbirds and I think a reminder that, like, Madison's different, dog. Like, they're not 2018 anymore. All of this talk about the revamped offense and they're going to come back. We're again at a low-scoring Central Division game where they can't muster 18 points. This has become what the Radicals' scoring capacity is, right? Like, we've seen this story. This is
right. They love the under 40 total points is like every single Radicals game.
I'm not a betting man, but man, I'd be smashing that. Like, and you know. It's that thing of it's how Madison wants to play. They want to keep the score low. They want to suppress as much as possible and win on all of the margins. But I think it's starting to come back on them because they aren't winning these close games. You look at this game, you look at the Indy game to close out last year when Cameron Brock gets that goal at the buzzer beater to get the tiebreaker and Indy advances to the playoffs. You look at results from the prior season, the start to the 2021 season for the Radicals, where they had the craziness at the end of regulation, whether the refs made the right call or not, that's neither here or there. The outcome was that Minnesota tied the game at the very end of the game, and then the Radicals had no juice going into overtime, and the Windshield just kind of walked out of there with a win. And it's just, it's one of those things where Madison won so many games pulling out these victories at the end, and it feels like cosmic karma's hand or something just coming to collect after all these years. Like they seemingly can't catch a break. And what's I think especially heart-wrenching is that it looks so much like Madison of old, right? Like they fall behind early. We're off on offense. And then they grind back and they make it into a game. And then it's supposed to be, the Radicals win by 1. And it's like, nope, not anymore. Not now. Not the last few years in this division.
Yeah, it's hard because it's like they kind of choked away the game in a lot of ways. They had the disc with like a minute and a half left, up by one, and then they forced that one to the end zone that Shepard actually blocked. Then Pittsburgh drove down, scored. Then Madison very early turned the disc over on a reset, and then eventually Shepard came down with the game winner. Which, by the way, the broadcast footage, like the top 50 cam, just gets on like the very edge, but you can see him calling for the disc, like he just like puts the finger up when Mast has it. And
to be fair, Shep does that like 20 times a game regardless.
Sure,
like,
sure. As he
that
should.
Dude is the number one, like, hand up, I'm open, like
as he should, especially in those situations. Yeah, I don't know if there was any doubt of like who was gonna get the shot of the game winner. But still, it's like a kind reminder that Max Shepard he's the guy that's shined the most consistently in the All-Star games over any other player. Like, he is still fully capable of taking over a game. He had 5 assists and 5 goals in that Madison game to start the season.
He looks motivated.
So
he looks
I kind of feel like if Pittsburgh Shepard might have a dark horse MVP campaign potential.
I mean, he was runner-up in 2019. We all saw the second half of that season after he lit the All-Star game on fire. It feels a little bit like that.
Well, and that was also a year. That was also a year where the Central Division was kind of weak, and Pittsburgh was just able to rise to almost the top of it. So yeah, I mean, in my mind, it's been like this is Indy's division in a way because they have the most consistency coming into this year. So many question marks with the other teams, but you might be right. Pittsburgh might be right up there. It's still a little early for me to say that like they could be in this playoff race. I need to see a little bit more. To me, it was more of like Madison is in trouble with the loss of KPS. I don't see Madison making the playoffs this year even more now, even though I know neither of us picked them to make it in our preseason picks.
We can save that for just a second. I wanted to get to the West Coast game, and then I wanted to get we can do quick reactions because I think that's important. So let's just touch on the West Division nail biter thriller finish between the Oakland Spiders and the Seattle Cascades. First overtime game of the 2023 season, total barn burner. Our West Division 40-plus turnover, just airing it out in every direction for both teams.
Gotta love them.
Super fun. I'm not going to lie. Like, that was a crazy fun game. Seattle's offense seemed to simplify a little bit. They shifted Khalif El-Salam over from his role on O-line on Friday night against Salt Lake. He played really well in that role, had a Callahan, but it felt like Seattle's offense was ball stopping around him. It felt at times like the younger Cascades players were just kind of standing around and waiting for Khalif to make the play. Whereas on Saturday against the Spiders, they shifted him to defense, and it just made the Seattle offense the Garrett Martin and Zeppelin Ronig show.
That's
and that
a fun
worked out
duo, man.
Really well.
Those guys are good.
Ronig looks really impressive in his second season. He looks like he's added a gear. He is just outstriding people in space and looks like a problem in one-on-one coverage. And Martin finished the weekend with 10 assists, has nominally been a defensive starter the past 2 seasons in this league, but he's been playing offense in club. It looks like that's starting to translate into his time now at the Cascades. He had some really impressive throws. Seattle put up a really impressive one of their kind of Rufio-esque sort of island of misfits, sort of like break chain, like nothing's quite going right, but it's all energy and we're making plays and sticking in it. Just Cascade specials, man. Like, I don't know how to describe that energy that they have, but it's chaotic, and sometimes it leads to things like this where they're clawing back into games. But Spiders had one of their most balanced performances I've seen from them in several seasons. They have this amount of throwers that they haven't had since basically their championship rosters of 2014 and 2015. And you saw it most pronouncedly in the 2023 debut for Mac Hecht for the Spiders, who went off. 9 assists, 65 completions, 570 some throwing yards, the game-winning assist, and just looking like the QB1 of QB1s. He looks right now at the start of the season like the second best thrower in the division behind Jonathan Nethercutt. Not gonna lie, like he is just that natural of a thrower. He's got that combination of just confidence, throwing range, and precision that is so hard to find. And he's a grinder. If you need him to just sit in the reset and get open for a bit, he'll go do that. That's why he had 60 plus touches. He's not just some striker downfield looking to finish the drive. Like he is looking to end things. And that's what he did in that game. You know, he carried them through the end of that game. And you know, the Spiders still have a lot of the same problems that they've had in the past. They have questionable turnover times. There's a lot of energy, right, with that team, and sometimes it's a little unbridled. Sometimes it gets a little up there, right? Yeah.
Well, that's why all the Spiders Cascades games are like really enticing, exciting matchups. Like these are just two teams that are full of energy, are like they ride momentum like more, I guess, more often and like more reliantly than other teams in the West Division, which is cool. And like it's another thing where like you see what the ceiling is, especially with guys like Hecht and Frankenberg had a great game too. Like they clearly have a lot of throwers that are elevating the overall ceiling of this line, but consistency is going to be the same question we'll always have with them, right?
Yeah. I know we're getting up a little bit past what we wanted to do for this episode, but Walker Frankenberg, man, that is a rookie to pay attention to. He was so impressive. Didn't have it.
He looked very good.
Turnover on the night, and was oftentimes their primary mover of the disc. I mean, Magsig, Keenan Lawrence had a great game, Hecht obviously, but they were turning to Frankenberg. And I was talking with somebody. Hecht was clearly the best performer in this game, but in like a 20-yard by 20-yard box, Frankenberg was a nightmare. Those Cascades players did not want to deal with his give and go stuff in the latter part of that game. I mean, all he does is just these little stunt 5-yard cuts and just kind of like triangulating around the reset and always staying in front of his defender, always in motion. And he felt like a Keenan Lawrence disciple in that when he would just score like a simple clap catch after give and go, he is fired up. Like he is about that 8 legs, 1 heart, 7 legs, 1 heart, whatever it is. It's 8 legs. They should change it to 7. There's 7 players. It'll be like it's an injured spider or something. It's overcoming.
It's not a spider anymore.
8 legs, 1 heart.
Completions wise though, do you notice they had like 350 completions in that, or 350 throw attempts in that game? Like that style last year in completion. I know, but like that style you're talking about, like Frankenberg fits right into what they want to do and what they do well. And it kind of makes sense that they have sort of this new potentially more spread out throwing options that they've had in years past, even if like the majority of the time they want to run through Hecht. Just like having Chris Long as like a cutter with throws now, like that's a great role for him too.
He had so good.
He had what, 6 goals in that game?
Moving up. Magsig too. Both Long and Magsig look a lot more dynamic downfield as receivers.
Yeah.
I think that they had that skill last year, but they were just using them so much better in those spaces. And man, their offense just in general looks nice. Like it's got a nice look. Like they're starting to get something there. I feel like at the beginning of last year, there was a lot of questions as to how this stuff would settle out with some of their departures from the season prior, with Justin Norton being one of the only kind of known throwers. Obviously, Evan Magsig had a good year last year, but this year he just looks evolved. He just looks like everything just came together a little bit more. And he's one of those players that he's always kind of been a little bit at the margins, but once you kind of get that eureka moment, you can just see it. Like he's playmaking out there. He's dictating. And I think that that's so cool. And they've got a couple guys who can do that.
Yeah, I'm excited to see them going forward. I do have some concerns over like their roster consistency and just availability of guys. I feel like they've maybe struggled with injuries or availability in the past, but like if they can field this lineup of guys every single week, yeah, I think they can just continue building around that. And yeah, I think their ceiling is as high as anyone right now.
I mean, the flip side is it took overtime, Mac Hecht turning into the best thrower in the league.
Sure.
And
it was also against Seattle
goal line
in
rejection.
the second game of back-to-back too.
Exactly. I was going
so
to say
we can always
Seattle,
pump the brakes, but hey, it's the overreaction. It's the week 1 overreaction episode. So we can stand by everything we've said.
It was just the flip side. It was just I've always got to douse a little bit of positivity with some skepticism. But we'll finish on this. So with Oakland's win, with Pittsburgh's win over Madison, do these wins, and kind of connecting back to what you were asking about with Atlanta and Indy, do these wins change anything about how you see the playoff races unfolding in these divisions? Because I think for me, I view Oakland kind of where I've been trending them, where I think that they're going to be in this playoff picture pretty predominantly in some capacity. And I think elsewhere, it's like Atlanta looks really good. Indy, I'm still a little hesitant on. Madison, I'm a little bit selling on him. Pittsburgh, I'm starting to buy more. Where are you at?
I think with Oakland, I'm not ready to call them like a playoff contender, but I am more confident in their ability to like mess with the playoff picture out west. Like no game going to Oakland, I think is going to be a gimme this year. And it was already like trending that way in what we saw from last year's team. So this definitely looks like a better Spiders team, even though, yes, it was the Cascades, second day of a back-to-back, whatever. Don't want to put too much weight on it, but they will like make some noise in the West. I just don't think they're going to make like enough noise to really cement themselves as a playoff contender. With Pittsburgh, I think like I was saying before, I'm still hesitant to call them like a team that I see in the playoff picture, but they're definitely, how do I want to put it? I think they're closing the gap right between them and Madison. I think whereas before I would say like there was a top 3 in Indy, Chicago, Minnesota, and then like maybe like 3.5, like just outside the 3 spot was Madison. Now I'm almost like wanting to switch Madison and Pittsburgh, where I would be like, Madison is probably a good amount lower than those top 3 spots, and Pittsburgh, I think, is probably going to contend a little bit more there.
Yeah, I think I got to agree with you across the board. I just see a little bit of the shift in the Central about who might be a little bit more contender.
But it's so early. Like we can't really come to these conclusions right now, right? Like it seems wrong to like we can't totally discredit Madison.
We've got the total map for the rest of the 2023 season. We know what all these teams are.
We got the script.
Figured it out.
Yeah, that's right.
Figured it out. Well, I guess we just didn't do any more episodes. So that's the end of our show forever. That's the end of Swing Pass. We're done.
It's been a good ride. It's been fun.
That'll be the end of our opening weekend recap episode of Swing Pass, though. We thank you for tuning in. It was a great week. Go ahead and check out the AUDL.com as well as AUDL social media for highlights. Check out AUDL YouTube also for those. We'll be around, of course, over the next several days, chewing into these matchups more and more, getting a little bit more into the film, talking about who impressed us most from this past weekend. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. We will be back later this week on Thursday, I believe, for a preview of next week's episode, when we will see an even fuller slate, as well as the debuts of some of the most notable teams, including the Week 2 Game of the Week, which will feature Colorado at Los Angeles. That's right. We've got Mama Bird versus Pavilianis, also the West Division champions versus the biggest movers of the 2023 offseason. It's gonna be bananas. I'm so looking forward to Week 2 already. We've got so many more games to get to in the 2023 calendar. Can't wait to be there with you all along the way. We'll see you soon. Bye now.